Hello world, this is Rick at Ralph. Today we'll be going over a opening called the Two Prince System. The idea of this opening is to gain a lot of space in the center so that you have comfortable piece development going into the middle game. Now the first thing that we need to know to be able to play this opening is that the opening will have a slightly different strategy based on how your royal pieces are arranged. Now right here we have what would be considered an ideal position for a two prince system. And the reason is because you have your longer range royal pieces on the top of the structure, allowing you to influence further down the board and get more expansions early on in the game. This tends to be more of an aggressive tactical opening when you play it this way. Now we'll show in contrast, let's say that you had different pieces up top. So let's say that your king's up top with your lion. Now this would be the opposite of what you'd want to play for this type of system. It's still playable, but your idea will be different here. So we'll show this one first. So first of all, the system does not have a specific move order, but there are certain traps to watch out for. But generally speaking, it's pretty easy to avoid the traps. The first way you could start it is on the wing. And when you do this, you are just freeing up your bishops and just allowing yourself different kinds of options, and maybe playing a different opening could be a possibility off of this, just in case your opponent plays something that you don't want to play against the two prince system. So the main thing you have to watch out for in these types of positions are camels coming in. Now in this situation, if this camel came in, it's pretty simple. You just advance your prince and the camel wouldn't be able to do anything, so that's just fine. If the camel came in on the other end, this is something we have to watch out for, because if you were to blindly move your prince up, the camel could come down here and influence this square right here. So we immediately have to respond to this somehow, and to top it off, we cannot advance our pawn any further. So we would have to immediately make a concession, and we only have two options. Three options. We could either move one of our two pawns up, and neither one of these moves are good for our pawn structure at all. This will give us a horrible pawn structure, and you will have a very weak center, and that is not what we're trying to get out of this opening. Your other option would be to move your lion up, but now you're also impeding your pawns, so none of these options are desirable, which is why if you ever have the camel move opposite, the best thing, there's only two viable options. So the first option is to move one of your center pawns, and generally it is better to move the one in front of your king in this situation. And then what you do is simply move your lion behind whatever pawn you moved. And you don't want to move it up too far, because you'll block out your bishops, and in this opening you need to keep your bishops open. So you just move it up a little bit, and this is a cure-all position to completely stop any tactics with the camels, so black will actually be punished for playing this way now. The other option is to move your opposite pawn before the camel jumps into this square, so that if the camel comes in, you can move your prince up, and now you're just fine. And just to reiterate, I've shown this trap before too. Let's say that this comes out, and this, let's say this pawn comes out. Camel is threatening to come here. This is a position I've showed a bunch of times. Just move your camel up so that this camel cannot harass your prince. It's not the end of the world if your prince gets harassed, but generally you don't want to deal with it, so it's just better to bring your camel out. Another alternative to handling this situation would be to possibly just move a pawn up, or you could even move your center pawn up, and the idea would be to just sidestep the camel, although this is something you have to judge on in the basis of each individual position. So this would be if someone used a 2 camel defense. Now normally a 2 camel defense would look more like this. Generally black's not foolish enough to bring their camels into the center immediately. They just bring both camels out and then put pressure on the position later on. And then you would have to move your princes up in order to sidestep the tactic I was talking about before. And see, now that you have both princes up, anytime that one of the camels were to try to come in with the tactic, you would automatically be ready to stop them, and this in itself will stop the camel from ever going into the center the way it wants to. And it's actually more likely that the camels will end up doing something like this. And there's a very solid structure that protects from cannon assaults later in the game, and generally just makes you very strong in the center. So this is why black does this. Now, in this type of position, your center advance is pretty slow, and we pretty much just focus on getting the king side pieces out and trying to work towards castling. You can also castle king queen side in this position. It's a matter of judging the position itself, but you should only castle queen side if your opponent is throwing an extremely aggressive king side assault at you that you can see coming in advance. So this is the type of parallels you usually see. It's very common for your opponent to also run a 2-print system against you, but this isn't anything to worry about because you can make different moves to create dynamics later on. So there's a whole multitude of ways to develop. I'm just going to show you a nice simple way. So when you have the high king and the high lion, you're not looking for too many early pawn breaks because you need to worry about castling, and you don't have the scope you need to go further yet. The lion is a good defensive piece in this position, so that if your opponent attacks you, you can defend easily, but you don't want to advance your pawns because you have wasted a move with them and you don't have the proper amount of piece power to support the advance so that you can create an outpost or a pawn chain, which is what you need to keep control of the center. So black will generally also try to castle. The key differences in this position tend to be the camels, because he used a 2 camel defense. Although black could try to mirror you, he'll generally be punished by this because you'll be able to exploit some sort of key weakness at just the right moment, but it gets pretty complex. So there's 2 ways you can handle the bishop in this position. A more passive method is to just move it right here, and this is just fine. This would be just a quick castle position where you're just trying to be safe and bring your queen side out really fast. But if you're looking for more of a center-based opening, your next best option is to actually move this pawn forward and place your bishop right here. Now in this type of position, you have to worry about your bishop being harassed, and there might be sometimes you have to retreat, which is why it can sometimes be better to just play the passive bishop. But you'll have the advantage here of putting some pressure on the king side and maybe make your opponent think twice about castling too early. So this is a matter of taste. For when you have a high king and a high lion, I prefer the safer approach because we're just trying to hurry up and get castled. So our more powerful, our long-range royal pieces can start the attack. So black will generally do more things along this line because black's trying to stuff the line more. So moves like this are more common out of black because black obviously doesn't want to mirror you. Because even though it seems dross, it's actually usually better for white. So black's gonna make slightly different kinds of bishop moves and try to bank off dynamic compensation for maybe having access to this king's prince line quicker than white will. So now white will move his rook over. I showed this in a different video. This is just a way to get your rook out quickly. The rook can be left over here for safety. That's a matter of preference. But for this type of opening, we're going to want a lot of pressure in the center or in the middle game. So it's much better to just bring out the rook and have access to it when you need it. But beware of cannons because cannons bully rooks in the middle game. So black's working towards the same goal, and then white ends up castling. Black works towards castling, and then from this point is where you can start looking at pawn breaks. And generally a good way to get a pawn break in this type of position is to first bring out another pawn towards the queen side and to try to pick off their pawn front slowly until you can find a spot to wedge in a pawn chain and get more control of the center. So black castles, and now this is where the meat of the game will really start. And there's so many ways that this can go down, but we're just going to show one quick effective method. So white's trying to bear down right here, and this is why it says black tries to stuff the line, because white is going to have the initiative in the beginning. So he's going to make a very stern effort to try to take down some pieces over here. So now there's two ways black could go from here. Black could either just keep getting solid, try to just take this as it comes. He can try to counter act it, or he could completely take a stand against it. And we'll just briefly look at all three of these possibilities. So in a possibility like this, white is going to get a small initiative coming in. Black could try something like this to try to isolate the pawn, and this could feasibly work. Downside is that maybe white will be able to hold on to the structure pretty well. So right now there's no commitment really required. So in this type of position, white could start to take dark squares and make this pawn wedged in, and you never really want to do anything like here, even if it was supported, because you're just opening up a file for white. So in this type of position, black's gonna want to fix the pawn probably, or attack it, and the fixed pawn's probably better. And now black's going to want to try to eventually break things down here, so black would go here trying to break things down. And white will start to maneuver his pieces to more favorable squares because he has gained more space. And so one thing we could see is to go here, and this is just black trying to break something down real quick. One way that white could react would be to go here, then black could take back, and this would end up with an open structure where it's fixed. Black could advance right here. White could just let the structure crumble, but probably not the best. In this position specifically, we would probably see white just allow black to make that decision, and we'd end up with a closed structure, which would somewhat favor white in that he has an aggressive pawn front, and black doesn't have so much access to his slider pieces right now. But it's more or less equal, and I even kind of like black a little bit better maybe in the end game because he does look a little more solid, but white's going to have a lot of initiative going into the middle game, so that's completely viable. Black doesn't have to go in on this. Black could just completely close the structure. This is kind of double-edged, but it would give black the space they need for the opening, so that's all pretty good. So we took a look at that position. Now let's take a look if black just tries to fight it. So let's just say in theory that black doesn't want this to just open up and become a war zone, so white will obviously keep on fighting, maybe go up here. So white's trying to put more pressure on this position, and this already looks a little bit better than what I showed before, but it's a matter of taste. This would lead to a more action-packed game, and it would start off more positional, but then the action will go quickly. And then right here, a few ways this could go down, but it'll look pretty close to the other variation from here on out. There's not really much more ways that black can keep fighting this, so eventually it just gives. And then right here, we take, the camel gets in, and we don't really see too much that we want to exchange for. So this looks pretty awkward for black. So we probably advance again, something like this. So same type of position from earlier. White doesn't really want to take because that would lead to the camel getting in. But this is slightly favorable over what we've seen before, where white had a really strong pawn chain. In this position, white's pawns are a lot weaker, and with some dedicated effort, black's going to get a pretty action-packed game out of this, and he might be able to like find a quick weakness to come after and turn the initiative around. So this is probably a better option for black if he wants to really fight the opening. And then the last way we're going to look at is if we just try to completely shut this out. Now this is sort of punishing the camel coming out early. If white had just brought his pawn up, he could have tried to fight for this square harder, but that has its own problems with the fact that black has his bishops in a really good position right now, and he can kind of put a lot of pressure on this queen side, which wants to spread. So that's why white feels the need to come in really quickly with his camel. So in this type of position, it's looking a lot harder for black to do anything, or white to do anything, I'm sorry. So like this won't work like it did before. We could try to come in right here, but it still doesn't look great, because now it's just like he just doesn't have enough force to really do anything. So what's he gonna do? He could try to come in here and just really wedge the piece in, but how would that turn out? So let's just check. So this doesn't really look too favorable for white per se. So I guess it's all right. It isolates the black's pawn, so he does manage to get through this way. So maybe there's a better move for, we'll try this move. This is a little kinky move. So I think maybe with this right here, white might not be able to add that sting to the pawn advance that he wants. And this would actually slow him down. Yeah, I think this is the key move right here because just take, threatening the bishop. So yeah, so no way that he takes is really good now, because if we look at this, black just gained a camel. So after looking at all that, we now see that white has successfully been stifled. So this is the other approach that white could see, is black stifling him, and this would force white to get creative, and he would have to expand his front out, and we end up with a pretty equal middle game. So this is the idea of what generally happens when you have the high king and the high lion. Now we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to talk about what happens in a more ideal position. So let's go back to that position we had before. Coffee break. Okay. So in this position, one thing to note is you don't have as many weaknesses floating around as before. So let's say that in this other position we notice that you have to advance your pawn really early because the camel will come over and cause chaos, but in this position you actually do not have to acknowledge that at all, and I'll show you why. This eagle is protecting these two files right here. So now you can advance it even after the camel comes up, and now you just force the camel to completely waste a move, and it gave you a little bit more in the way of options. This is why you can already see that the center is much better supported. So there still is the wing weakness on the side with the queen, but an advantage here is that you don't have to worry so much about this camel coming to the wing right here. So let's say something like this happens. Camel can't go right here. Camel can't go to the wing because the queen's blocking it. So as you see, the position is very, very safe. Now the one thing you do have to watch out for, let's say you start the system from this side of the wing. Well, in this position, you actually could mess up and still make that same foolish mistake. And as you can see, you can no longer advance this pawn 2 spaces, and you're going to be stuck making an awkward move again. Except this time you don't even have the option of the lion move. But there's it's pretty easy to see coming, so just remember that if your weak side has a camel come out, you just bring yours out. But we're going to show a little bit different of a defense from black, because I want people to see how much different this opening plays out. So let's say black plays more or less along with the opening and just wants to get his center out. So what we're going to see is that you just bring one of your princes up, get your center solid, and then if black keeps opposing, you end up having to bring both your princes up. That's a mismove. But the nice little advantage here is that you end up with a slight initiative over black, and once you manage to castle, you get a pretty awesome position where you can start an attack really early. But now if black hadn't brought his center out, you could actually just start pushing pawns like before you even castle. But I want to show a more proper opening, because most people aren't just going to give you a huge bid for the center. So right here we end up with this position where it's actually really easy to just push in the center. So let's say he makes an advancement and tries to do this. So we can just start immediately breaking things down, trying to cause problems for him in the position. So he'll bring his pawn up, and yeah, you get a way quicker center and everything supported, especially on this file. And your opponent actually is going to have a lot of trouble keeping you at bay. So there's just so much you can do. So you get your camel out, and this is what really starts things rolling. Because once you have your camel out, your cannon can get into the game, and this makes it possible to perform a pretty strong pawn break. So black could come in too. So let's say black tries to start the initiative. Well, it's pretty simple. You just isolate the pawns. So he might want to take with the queen here, and if he does, he's probably actually smart. But this is going to cause some harassment later on, so not to mention it's just posing queens. As you see, everything's just pretty action-packed. So that's pretty nice. And then look, this actually creates a little trap where you don't even want to take this because the eagle will end up taking that. So we see black has some pressure too in this position. So we don't really want to isolate it in that manner. So a better thing to do would be just go here, force the queen to come out. There we go. So we're just trying to isolate the position. Now if he takes with a piece, that's not so bad either, because now it's committed his bishop into a really awkward spot, and we can just chase it probably. So just chase. So that's pretty nice. The bishop has to back off. It could take right here. This is completely considerable as a move, but nothing wrong with that. They're more or less even as far as I can tell. Black might have an endgame advantage, but it's unlikely. And as you see, black's pawn is pinned down pretty good right here. So this has its advantages. So what does black even do? Well, the best thing to do is probably just get another piece involved. So let's say the bishop. But even the bishop's kind of in some dire straits too. So if we look at this, I mean, bishop's gonna have to move out of the way eventually. But yeah, this is how you really break down the center. This is a hard thing to show in Metamachy because it takes a really long time to build your attacks up. Even this pawn push could have been considered a little premature. But everybody has differing opinions on how it should be. And the main idea is just to try to stuff the pawn lines. As you see how I stuff the pawn lines, and just take advantage of your powerful files and try to open those up. So this is more or less the idea we see out of the high eagle, high queen. Everything gets rolling a lot faster, and you see a lot more action. And the two prints, as you can see, it's a very nice system opening to use. It's just really fun, and it gives you a lot of options. So you can really be creative in the way you fight your opponent. And it works against just about every opening. That's what I like about it. So no matter how kooky your opponent tries to play, let's just give one more example before we stop. Right here. So no matter how kooky your opponent tries to play, this opening pretty much holds up. So let's say that your opponent just tries like some kooky double fianchetto structure, right? So we see something like this, and the opening just stays solid against these types of structures. So as you can see, everything's staying solid. And then we even get like some kooky moves, like you can move up here and threaten this pawn. So now we're actually making use of the opening on top of the fact that it's keeping us safe. So yeah, just like no matter what your opponent really does, you get a nice center, you get nice piece development, and you probably be able to make some advancements later on. and it's just really fun opening. I love it. So yeah, we'll show a few more moves with this, just to give you an idea of how useful this opening can be. And it's just like, wow, we do that. We have some preponderance right here. Maybe he can do something like this, but we can always, punish him for it later on. And your center influence is always amazing in this. And a big idea of this opening is to bring your princes up as quick as possible. Try to use them as support pieces. This is a very big concept. And yeah, it's I love it. But this type of structure right here, what we see with the phalanx, this is something really good against hyper modern openings. And the opening in general is just good because it gives you the option to make early pawn advances and play pretty much any way you want. It's like the ultimate system opening in this. There will be slight critical lines, but every opening has those, even the systematic ones. So, you ever feeling froggy, give this one a try. If anybody's looking to play a game, I play on Jockly every day. I thought it was pronounced Josley, but somebody on the website corrected me. But yeah, I always keep open invitations, and I will play anybody and their mom at Metamachy. So come, show them. I'll put my money where my mouth is. Have a good one.